Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, one and all. Thanks for joining us in the BRM Brownbag episode. We are at episode number 38. I'm your host, Suresh GP from TaUB Solutions. I'm so glad to have Jeffrey Benoit, or Jay Benoit, as he loves to call himself, a certified business relationship manager, has been a business relationship manager for a number of years. And we thought it would be a great idea to share Jeff's experience in the journey of BRM and get inspired as a BRM community as we celebrate single global BRM community always. So thanks, Jay, for joining us today and sharing your perspectives on the business relationship management journey. Tell us for our viewers about how did you get into the world of business relationship management, because you have a lot of IT technology background, and what prompted you to be in that world, and what has been that experience altogether?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, and I hope everyone finds this informative and useful. So I think my story is probably similar to a lot of others. I'm an IT BRM, so I've got a pretty deep technology background, but I started really in the trenches. Actually, funny story. My IT career actually started with typewriters.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and it's I'm maybe I'm that old, but maybe I'm not as old as you think I am, because I live in the state capital for Florida, and typewriters persisted here a lot longer than maybe other places because of the state.
Nice.
But yeah, actually, was a typewriter repair person, and but that company had a computer network, computer repair side, and anyway, that's kind of my very beginning is typewriters, but started out really with my IT career in end user support and worked on, that direct sort of employee engagement and moved on to, networks, servers, virtualization, and things like that until I landed in a role with a federal client, and that was actually very different from my past experiences. I mean, the technology is the same. At that point, I was infrastructure administrator, ended up uh, moving up into IT service delivery, but it was direct client facing, and so you weren't insulated from the end users and the business partners from that were using the technology that you were responsible for, where previously on what I would call the corporate side of things, there was always that buffer. You really didn't get how people use that technology, what real value they got out of it, or how your role really even contributed to the overall business objectives and goals. But having that direct client engagement was sort of really my first experience to business relationship management before I even really knew what it was.
Hmm.
And I really enjoyed it. But that was my springboard into a formal BRM role. I ended up coming off that project in back to the corporate side of things, and joined a relatively new BRM team, and had a lot of exposure there, stubbed toes, learned a lot of lessons. But that's sort of my story in a nutshell.
Awesome. Now, Jay, in terms of kicking this off, when it talks about business relationship management, we are talking about value, right? So the first question, and it's a loaded question, what value can BRM capability bring to an organization? So viewers are familiar with BRM as a role, as a discipline, and the capability. So not everybody is designated as part of a role called or a designation called business relationship manager, but all of them work together in tandem, in cohesiveness to finally deliver some outcomes. But what is real value, and particularly with the IT aspect of it, where IT has always been an order taker and trying to build that steps towards a strategic partner, what value do you think that BRM capability can offer any organization?
Well, sure, and definitely my background is in IT, but BRM as a whole, as a capability, you know, the providers can be multitudes, right? It could be HR, obviously, finance, pick your provider. And I think the principles, I know the principles are definitely all the same. But I think as a first step, we need to decide what do we mean when we say the word value. And there's a bunch of different contexts for value. I think when we think about this topic for BRM, the context of usefulness is what comes to mind for me. And
Right.
so that's what kind of, how is BRM important, or what's the utility or benefit that the BRM role can provide to the organization that it exists in. So when you think about how is a BRM useful, second part for me would be, setting the stage of what does the BRM do, right? It connects the business with the provider. Again, could be ITHR, whatever. It improves communication. The capability, delivers value focused on outcomes over, just pure metrics or KPIs. It helps create that stronger partnership between the provider and the business. And it also supports, change as new ideas come out, whether it's maybe a high level corporate idea or something that's coming from the business, the boots on the ground that needs something to work better, but helping that change happen, managing those expectations and alignment. So how are BRMs useful within the context of what BRM does? So putting that all together, acting as connectors, orchestrators, and navigators to equip organizations to reach their full potential, their full purpose, breaking down silos, aligning services, and delivering those measurable outcomes. So that's I think to me what the core value that BRM brings within that context of usefulness.
No, that's obviously a loaded effort to do it. But to be fair, a lot of BRMs don't get that level of role clarity within an organization. A lot of struggle starts stemming down from the fact that, hey, I don't even know what this role is all about. As an at an organization level and also with your peers, they find out why is this new role emerging. So have you seen that kind of questions come up and say, how do you establish that role clarity and who's instrumental in an organization to set that quorum so that people know exactly the value proposition and do it? Because if you don't set that up right,
Hmm.
I've seen a lot of BRM teams get dismantled after a couple of years because the
Yeah.
leadership team has moved on. So, how do you see that imperative within your organizations that you work with?
So fantastic question, and it's the what is it, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step, and so
Right.
that first step is super important. And I've seen firsthand and secondhand as well, good things and bad things happen. And it comes down for me to the leadership.
Hmm.
And that's the leadership of both the BRM team, but also, if you report to maybe a senior, the BRM team may report to a senior VP or the CIO or something like that. And it's how does that leadership view BRM? The flip side to that is how do the individual BRM team members view themselves? And I think that first step, you want to be useful, right? That value context we were just talking about. And a lot of times, because maybe you're new as a BRM, maybe you've kind of got an idea, but you've never really done it before. Maybe you've got the BRMP, maybe you don't, doesn't really matter. But most people want to be helpful, they want to be useful. And so they'll kind of grab that first opportunity. And oftentimes, those first opportunities are very tactical.
Hmm.
You know, fix this for me.
Yeah.
That's where this starts.
Yeah.
And that's fine. That's I think a valuable part of a BRM role, but you don't want to get stuck there, or worse, go deeper.
Right.
But it does provide, or it can provide a foundation.
Right.
And so I think that's that key step is okay. You're grasping for a start, and so you fix this for me, for your partners, but you have to use that as the floor. You don't want to use it as your house, so to
Right.
speak.
Correct.
um, and so that value proposition for the partner, um, after you have that laid that foundation, it can be different, right? There's differing value perspectives, but as a BRM, you have to be able to understand those different partner perspectives and really ultimately reconcile them, right? Because you can't have, if you've got 10 business partners or five or whatever, you've got to be able to kind of scoop them all up into a pile and come up with the common themes to be able to make any sort of real difference in your organization. But in general, I think the value proposition, no matter what provider organization you may represent, it could be IT, could be HR, could be finance, but you give them, BRM gives them a window into that provider, right? Because you should be an expert in whatever subject you are. Um, and additionally, be that expert in on the business side of the house as well. But it gives that business partner a window. It helps them feel understood, helps them feel heard, gives them a voice within that provider, and a path for their ideas, right? They're feeling heard, they're feeling understood, but you have to be a BRM of action. You can't just receive the feedback. You can't just give them a hearing ear or an active listening, or you have to go into active listening, I should say, and actually do something with it and really provide the usefulness or the value that BRM can bring.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in from a perspective of leadership changes happen when they bring in, they move out. How do you establish that value to the new business partner who comes on board? Because they might not have heard about business relationship management. They are kind of new, and you are kind of the proponent or the protagonist who will go there and tell the value of that. Um, how has that been when you bring the leadership change and they are not super upbeat about BRM like what we are? How does that journey navigate through? Sometimes it could go either ways, right? I mean, it could just pull it in all different directions. But what has been your experience? Like a seasoned BRM, you see the value, but there's a new person on board. How do we pitch and position that so it's not overwhelming for them as business partners, but they are also trying to be open and receptive towards the way? So, is there any kind of secret sauce of how we go about in that journey?
Sure, sure. Secret sauce. That's a good way to think about it. And it's death, taxes, and organizational change. Those
Right,
are the only three things that you can count on. And it's just when you get comfortable with the way the organization is, it's going to change.
right,
So if you haven't experienced it yet as a BRM, trust me, you will. So you have to be comfortable in that shifting sand, if you will. I like to call it the messy middle.
right,
Uh, But so new leaders come on. Maybe it's even an existing leader that perhaps has a new role within your organization.
right,
And oftentimes, especially if they're new, they can show up and not be familiar with what BRM is.
right.
And as your new business partner, it's on you to have that initial conversation to really understand where are they at. What do they even know anything about BRM? Many times they will show up with sort of that traditional view, kind of a siloed mindset, if you will, and they look at things like IT and HR, those provider organizations, they'll look at them as just, providing a service.
Right.
This is broken, this doesn't work, I need this to happen. It's the vending machine, push the button and something comes out. That's all their experience is. That's all they maybe even really want because that's their understanding.
Right.
It's on us as BRMs to help them understand that strategic value, to sort of fill in that gap between, I've never thought about IT as a partner before. I never thought about HR as a partner before. You have to come in as the BRM and fill that gap in and help them understand how BRMs are useful, what value they can bring.
Yeah, and I think you're right in terms of taking that steps which will make you grounded, you're getting that, addressing that value, but also making sure that you understand and give people the time and space to absorb the changes that have happened, right? And I love the word about death, taxes, and organizational change management. That makes it much more imperative in the way why people will change, and eventually people will go through that. So, have you seen being in a part of an organization for a long term? you have a much different ability or an influencing capability towards the BRM part, or does it doesn't matter if you stay in an organization for a long period of time? How does that play out?
Well, I think, if you know where all the skeletons are, what closets they're in, can definitely help, especially if it's a fresh leader from the outside,
Right,
because they don't know anything. And if it really gives you an opportunity to sort of come in, and it's crucial in the beginning to have a, close walk with that partner, real
right,
close communications. I always say over communicate and we can dial it back as we need, as things kind of settle in. But giving them, it's an easy in if you've got that sort of institutional knowledge to really help that new leader understand your organization. Another thing I always like to say is the BRM role should be 1,000 miles wide and 100 miles deep.
right.
We get that really broad view of the entire organization, but we're not going to go in and start, actually doing the nitty gritty work. We're just
Right.
going to connect and orchestrate and things like that. But having that view and sharing it and helping them understand how the different puzzle pieces of the organization work or connect together is a good way to sort of build that rapport and have that beginning of that relationship for the new partner. And then as you do that, kind of weaving in that role clarity, that first step, this is their first step of 1,000 miles. So help them have that first step with BRM and put it in the right direction. It's a unique and a great opportunity to have that first impression and really get that BRM relationship off to a strategic direction rather than, hey, my laptop doesn't work.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of everything boils down to measurement at the end of the day, whether you call it as KPIs or KRAs or OKRs. So how do you measure or report the BRM value? Again, very sticky topic. Everybody thinks about relationship maturity model as one kind of an example, but is there
Mhm.
anything beyond? But because, as you rightly said, we don't get into the nitty-gritties of the work that we do. We are dependent on the providers and the rest of the organization to deliver that outcome. We are kind of facilitating that whole journey with having the value piece as a theme, centralized theme. But how do you measure and report value, and how do we demonstrate that BRMs are inseparable with business
Yeah.
partners?
So, there's two sides. One's a whole lot easier than the other, but tangible and intangible value or benefits.
Hmm.
And if you think about the idea of BRMs as orchestrators, that conductor sitting in front of the orchestra and making sure everybody is ready to play, they've got the right music on their stands, and when that first bowstring draws or whatever happens first, it sounds good.
Correct.
And so that's like the tangibles, right? Are the employees satisfied? Do they like what they hear if they were listening to a conference or a concert, not a conference? And so feedback sessions. What do the customers think? What's their experience like? You might do that through a survey. The innovation, the new idea that you brought forth, that you brought those differing value perspectives together, and you've got a common theme that's going to increase revenue. Well, or open a new market maybe.
Yeah.
So that's easy. What do the financials say after that's happened? Kind of on a maybe a little more BRM team specific thing. How many projects or pursuits did you support this quarter?
Hmm.
How many stakeholder engagements did you have? There's some real basic kind of tangible things that as a BRM individual or a team, they can report on those things and say, look, we've talked to this many people about this many things. Those intangibles, a lot harder, right? Those are the things like, okay, the concert's over. How does the violin section feel about it? How did it go? What do they think?
Right.
So are the partners, do they feel heard? You can't really put a metric around that, but it's an aspect
Right.
it's a measurement that you can do. Are the partner relationships improved? That one, maybe you could put some things around it. The relationship strategy on the page, you could track things like that. basically, for me, the intangibles all boil down to stakeholder feedback.
Hmm.
And one of the tenets of BRM is be fearless. So don't be afraid to ask your business partners for feedback. That's one of the things that, admittedly, in the early days, I was apprehensive to do. Partly because nobody wants to hear bad news, right? But the bad news can be just as valuable as the good news. It just may not make you feel as good. But ask for that stakeholder feedback. Be fearless. If it's bad, great. Okay, it's something to improve. If it's good, well, then that's easy to share up the chain and say, look, remember that that business partner that was always bad mouthing the provider. Well, look, they're happy, and here's an email from them proving it.
Yeah. No, that's solid evidence of measurement. Now, let's switch back in terms of challenges. In your role as a BRM, what are some of the typical challenges that you face day in and day out that has always felt overwhelming, has felt that, oh, I need some more ammunition to for the battlefield. So what are some of the challenges that you have seen has been really uh, taking a lot of weight in the way that you have played the role of a BRM?
So I know one of the main challenges that I've had, and I think others would agree, is access to the information,
Right,
access to the data.
right,
The idea of BRM is influence. You may
right,
not, you almost never have direct reports of the provider from the provider, right? They're
right.
always, if anything, they're dotted lines. So, and I always like to refer to myself as a recovering IT guy. I get
Mm.
it. As an IT people, and I'm going to assume it's the same with HR and other providers, but they're good at what they do. They just want to go do it and leave them alone.
Right,
Because the BRM, when you walk in and you start asking questions, you're like, why are you asking me this? Go away. I don't have time to talk to you.
right,
And as a little side tangent, I think many BRM teams take their provider organization for granted.
right,
We tend to be very business focused. We want to be that good business partner, and that is obviously very important, but don't neglect your provider organization. Because
right,
if you do, it makes your job a lot harder. So going back to having access to the information, whether it's what does the IT roadmap look like? What is the raw data? The dashboards for the service desk, the end user computing or desk side support team. The hard metrics, and then the plan. Having access to that makes your job as a BRM so much more easier when you do have those quarterly business reviews or monthly management reviews, whatever form your stakeholder engagement takes. Having that information to be able to communicate makes your job a lot easier. And part of that, I think, some of that resistance to giving the information is they don't. You have to do a good job of role clarity with your provider as well. Otherwise, they think you're coming. They can think you're coming for their job,
right.
and they don't want to be. They don't want to share that information. And what you have to do as a BRM is help them understand. Look, you, good news. You don't have to talk to the business anymore. I'm going to do it for you, but you have to give me that information.
Yep, that's a very valid point in terms of access to information part of it. So, with the new world of AI coming into picture, is BRM even relevant? A lot of business partners and the work that we do as top solutions globally. The question is AI replace BRMs, right? I mean, with AI changing a lot of those roles these days, and so what's your take around the relevance of BRM in the world of AI?
Well, I think it's even more relevant than before because people want that human touch.
Hmm,
AI is and will continue to have a huge impact on business. It's
right,
already happening. But how BRM becomes more valuable is bridging that gap between what the strategic purpose for that organization is, and then how AI can enable it for the business partner. Because right now, even though it's AI obviously has been around for 40, 50 plus years, really, it's just maturing, and the technology, the hardware is finally catching up with its potential. And so we're seeing that sort of hockey stick graph go where it's all of a sudden AI is everywhere.
Right.
But most people, business partners especially, they're good at what they do, and they hear these buzzwords and AI is going to fix everything. And that's really not true right now. They're basically just really smart. Well, they're not even really smart, but they're really good prediction machines. They can guess the next word really, really well. And helping the business partners understand what the real value of AI is and how it can really help them do their job better. But then also hearing that feedback on what they wish AI could do for them,
Right.
then translating that into, this is obviously very IT centric. So translating that back to the IT provider and helping them say, look, we need really clean data. We need to have a better governance around our data, because the old adage, garbage in, garbage out. That's AI. Bad data for AI just makes AI say bad things faster. It
Right.
doesn't help. So what is that? How does the IT roadmap need to change to support AI, but in that context of what the business is actually looking for?
Yeah.
Now, tactically, I think for a BRM, AI can help you sort of consume business information and digest it, understand it much more quicker.
Right.
Instead of having to spend, 2, 3 days on business strategy information, you can feed it into AI and then prompt it and come to an understanding much more quickly. Now, of course, you have to go back and be able to verify it, make sure that it's not lying to you or hallucinating. But there's definitely a part for PRMs to be able to just leverage AI to make their jobs easier
Yeah.
as well.
Awesome. Final question is, new aspirant to business relationship management, they are like looking at with buzzing enthusiasm and curiosity. They want to go to Jay and ask them, Jay, you've been as a veteran in this space for a long period of time with all the changing, ups and downs. What do you recommend for new bees who are into the business relationship management world? Is it relevant? What are the skills or competencies that they need to focus to be an effective BRM?
So, if I was talking to my younger self, or had, a younger, newer, maybe younger isn't the right word, but a newer BRM looking for some mentorship, I think you really do need to understand what value a BRM brings to an organization.
Hmm.
You really need to have that firm grasp before you make your elevator pitch, that first step of 1,000 miles. Because when you start talking to your business partners, they're going to ask you, well, who are you? Why should I care? What do you do? And if you don't explain it in a way that's relevant to them, that sets that first foot more towards the strategic side versus the tactical, the end of your 1,000-mile journey, it could be a dilution of your role.
Right.
It often takes the form of a really slow shift or slide into a tactical or operational role. And when you get there, many times leadership will look at what you're doing or what the team is performing and say, I've got people that do that already. And so the team is, either diluted, reduced. I even seen one case where the entire BRM team was just turned into project managers one day. BRM's gone. You're basically just project managers anyway, because that first step that they took wasn't towards the right direction. They didn't have that role clarity, and so that couldn't be communicated. So my advice is just that: really understand what BRM provides. Don't grasp that golden ring too tightly of the tactical
Right.
to provide early value. It's okay. Just don't get stuck there. Don't go deeper, because if you don't, one day you'll wake up and maybe the BRM team's gone, or maybe you're doing something else entirely.
Yep. No, absolutely. That's spot on. Thank you so much, Jay, for spending your valuable time to share some practical nuggets of wisdom in the business relationship management world. I'm sure that our viewers, our community members are going to be enjoying that conversations and would love to have and continue this conversation, right? So that's for today, but I think it'd be great to kind of see you. And if someone wants to get in touch with you to know more about you, what's the best platform or best resource to reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to carry this conversation forward with anyone who would like to do so. The easiest way to find me is on LinkedIn. I'm on there every day and active and ready to have new conversations. We're BRMs, right? We want to meet people and learn about them. So
Awesome. And I love take this as the final takeaway that AI can exist, but human beings can make that AI look better. And we all need human beings. We need the emotions and we need people to feel that relationships matter more than technology, right? Technology could be an enabler. It could be an area where it could accelerate things, but relationships and having a coffee and probably meeting you again, Jay, in the BRM Connect conference this year would also be a treat because that's another way that it could all shape up to build that and foster relationships to make it big. So thank you so much once again for your time today. Viewers, I hope you enjoyed this session and we will come back to you on our next episode of BRM Brownbag. So subscribe to this channel. And as you know that this is available on Spotify, Google Podcast, as well as Apple. So keep listening, whether you are in a gym or in walking around, trekking that pot. And we'll see you again with another episode for business relationship management. Until then, celebrate business relationship management and make sure that you add value continuously with your business partners because each and every day matters. And do not underestimate the power of a day that you can make a difference. Thank you, everyone, and see you all again.